for that. Now, Paul and Kit, my apologies for keeping you waiting. If you can maybe unmute yourself so that you make it to the top.
That's fine, Debbie. It's Kitty here.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Kit. So we are so lucky to have Kit and Paul joining us today. As I mentioned when we started the awards night, domestic violence was a topic that came up within our committee when we were discussing the ways in which toy libraries support the community, and the research that the Ozarns did and presented at the last two training days that we held really described the range of ways that you as leaders within your toy library are supporting your members and your families. But when we were talking about this in the committee, there wasn't a high level of confidence that we would know as individuals or as a toy library community how to respond to either somebody talking about domestic violence that they might be experiencing, or if you had any concerns about it. And you know, we've got a very important role to play supporting families, you know, with our child safe policies, but we've got to, you know, make sure that extends to all of the families as well. So Paul and Kit have very kindly offered to run about a 45-minute training session for us. So hopefully you have a few more skills and feel a bit more confident to help identify and then know what you should do if you suspect or somebody reports domestic violence for you. So let me introduce Paul first. Paul Zappa is the General Manager of Prevention and Community Development for the Men's Project at Jesuit Social Services. He spent over a decade working in the prevention of men's violence against women, working predominantly with men and boys in a variety of settings. He's the co-founder of Club Respect and has worked closely with Sons of the West over a number of years, delivering the Changemaker sessions, educating men about violence prevention. He was drawn to the work with Jesuit Social Services after developing the Modelling Respect and Equality program with the Men's Project, which is one of the projects of Jesuit Social Services in 2018, utilising their Man Box research. The Man Box research has produced key data about the impact of rigid gender stereotypes upon Australian men, and Paul's passionate about the capacity of this new knowledge to create fresh, positive, engaging initiatives that educate and influence young boys and men to lead lives free from violence. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Paul suggested that we should bring Kit along as well to provide, I guess, a woman's perspective to the topic. And Kit's the CEO of WHISE, which is the Regional Women's Health Service for the Southern Metropolitan Region of Melbourne. Their team of health promotion professionals work to promote gender equality, sexual and reproductive health, and the prevention of violence against women. Proudly the daughter of two feminists from southwestern rural Victoria, Kit has consistently and passionately advocated for gender equality, empowering women and girls. A strong believer in the importance of collaboration and partnerships, Kit has championed on the value of embracing diversity and tolerance in our communities, workplaces, education institutions and governments. So welcome, Kit.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you to everyone. Hi, Paul.
How are you, Kit?
Yeah, really well.
Which one of you has got the PowerPoint presentation and wants the power?
Kit has
Me.
the power.
That's Kit. Kit has the power.
Yeah, as they say.
Let me just find you and make you a co-host. Okay. So you should be a co-host now.
Thank you.
So hopefully you can run your...
Can you see that, everyone?
Yep, it's coming up all in your hands. Great.
Thank you. Well, we'll just head off, if that's okay with everyone. Firstly, thank you so much for the opportunity. Paul and I have developed something that'll go for about 30 minutes based on feedback we got from your committee of management, haven't we, Paul?
Yep.
And we'll go through this. We know we've got about 30 minutes to cover off a few things, but I just wanted to touch base, if I could, with you on some kind of key points to start with. I guess the first thing we wanted to just note is that, look, there might be some things that come up for you, and we're going to give you just some phone numbers and resources, both now and also through your committee of management, to just know that you can call upon this. It's not a therapeutic sort of presentation, it's an information sharing. But, you know, we just need to acknowledge from sometimes things come up from people. So the phone number you need to know, which is nationwide, is 1-800-RESPECT, and that's a 24/7 counselling service. And you'll actually hear us talk about that again later on this evening. The other thing too is, you know, being respectful of each other. We just ask you, you know, to make sure you're muted, but I can see already you're across that. You know, raise your hand. There's a feature on Zoom if you want to make reactions. And also if you've got questions through the session, just pop them into the chat box. We have going to run this, as I said, for about 30 minutes. And then we'll make time for questions. But as I said, if you've got questions through it, please let us know, because your question might be questions that other people have. We want to talk about what family violence is and what are the signs and what causes it. For many members of our community, though, the often question that they ask is, well, what can I do about it? What is my role? And your role in toy libraries, you're really at the interface of community and probably see things. And it's really important that you know what your role is and opportunity is. Can you get involved? What support can you provide? What should I say and not say? And what we're going to do is talk through how you would respond to a disclosure. And I think the key thing to say is every single piece of information we're telling you tonight is not a state secret. It is all in the public domain. So following on from this session, we're going to share all the resources and information that we talk about through to Debbie, who can make it available to you. So we're not showing anything here that you've got to pay for, that you've got to go to a course for, although you can. It's all things that are in the public domain. Is there anything you wanted to say, Paul, on what we're going to cover tonight?
Yeah, I just want to mention that I see two parts that as a worker in this space, you may see or hear things that means that something is happening like now. And we'll also want to go to the super prevention end, which is the young people in your care and what they're learning right now that we know leads to violence. So there's two parts as we see that you could be playing a role here. It's for someone who's experiencing violence right now, and it's to prevent violence from happening in the next 1 to 20 years.
Yep. So let's go to the bigger picture and what is family violence. So the thing to know is that family violence is not only physical. It is controlling behaviours. It is control of who you can meet, how you can meet it, what you can wear, where you can go. It is financial control as well as physical control. It is spiritual abuse, neglect. It includes harassment, and it includes stalking. And all of them are classified as violence against other people, and it is not just physical. Sometimes people are surprised to learn that, but in Victoria, which is where I'm based, that is actually written into our law now. So the police will recognise family violence as being the breadth of that scope of work. Paul, you got any comment on that?
I just find it, as I've worked in this sphere for so long, that I think with the ads on television and that sort of thing, we always go towards that it's physical. And so I'm really supporting what Kit's saying here. There are so many elements to it, and we have so much research in mental health and those sorts of things to say that, you know, long-term emotional abuse can be as bad, if not worse, than physical. And I just wanted to reinforce that point. Yep.
Let's go to the stats. You might have heard of these stats before. Look, we know, and we often hear from people like Natasha Stott Despoja, who you might know, that 1 woman a week is murdered by her current or former partners. And the reality of the violence is that for men and women, we are both impacted for violence, but the nature of that violence is different. For men, the violence is often once off in public and by a stranger. But we know for women that it is private, ongoing, persistent, and often done by someone who is known to them. This particular infographic here is produced by an organisation called Our Watch. Does anyone know of Our Watch? Have people heard of Our Watch? Yay, great. So Our Watch stands for, Watch is for women and their children, and the idea is that this is a national membership organisation that in Australia we're very lucky to have, because it is really at the foreground of addressing violence in the home and the drivers of it. The members of Our Watch are the state and territory governments and the federal government. They fund Our Watch to do what it does. And what you've got here is just a comparison of the different types of violence. So we know that the 1 in 3 are impacted, women are impacted by family violence, but you can see here actually that 1 in 2 men have experienced physical violence, that 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual violence as opposed to 1 in 22. 1 in 6 Australian women have experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or former partner as opposed to 1 in 19, and so on. The point to be made is that there is a significant burden on women from violence in the home, but the drivers that drive that are the drivers that drive men's behaviour and violence as well, which we'll go into in just a second. Paul, did you want to comment on that while I just go on to what those causes of violence are?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with men and boys, and trying to get them to see that this is not a men versus women issue, that there's no winners when it comes to someone being violent, and that the people who are violent themselves are actually hurting themselves as well. But and this is the area that I work with the Jesuit Social Services around men and masculinity. The stats say that we know that 95% of violence is perpetrated by men, whether that is against men or women. We know that 95% of the violence that's happening is coming from men. So there's something about men and masculinity that we need to look at that's not right. Yep. And that's the work that we're doing.
So the same organisation that I spoke of before, and I mentioned before, did international worldwide evidence and research into what the drivers of violence against women were, found this. This is rolled gold. And it's really important for us, and it can be quite challenging to know that the drivers of violence against women and in our community are linked to gender inequality, right? Gender inequality sets the necessary social context. And right about now, some people start to say, well, hang on, isn't it drugs? Isn't it alcohol? No, they're contributors, but they don't drive it. If there is inequality already, that's the necessary context. Think of it like a canvas and what you put on the canvas. So we know that, one, if we have relationships that condone violence against women, or we see images that do that, like in the media, in the movies, that is a driver. If we have situations where men control decision-making and limit women's independence, and that can be everywhere from the workplace to the home to the community, that sets a necessary context. Stereotypes are incredible drivers of violence, and I'll get Paul to talk about that in a little minute, but the stereotypes of men and women really embed behaviours and norms that set up these contexts for the condoning of violence. And when we have disrespect towards women shown at multiple levels, whether that be in public, where we have the put down of women in leadership, whether we have it in private, where mums or sisters are put down as being just a girl, or you run like a girl. When we have that disrespect towards women and we encourage or allow male-to-male friendships that emphasise aggression, the boys will be boys attitude, this is actually what sets the context of violence, which is why organisations like myself and Paul's do all we can to try to prevent these drivers. Paul, did you want to talk about that from your experience and work?
Yeah, I'm probably going to, I'm being cautious not to jump ahead to 3 slides, but I just wanted to mention for everyone in the audience that you'll probably see already where there's something really prominent for your work, and that's that stereotype construction of gender, basically. And I'm seeing Debbie's just posted something that you see gender stereotypes in toy libraries, and this is the part that Debbie and I have spoken about before. That whole thing, you know, pink and blue. It starts from it starts the minute you go and buy the jumpsuit for the baby, and it works its way all the way through. And before you know, we've set up these habits of what men and women should and shouldn't do. And just supporting what Kit's saying, it seems too small. It seems, no, it couldn't be that. But that's what eventually sets up that I am more important than the other. And if you look at any violence that happens in the world, if you even men versus men violence, it's one being more dominant over the other. And look around the history of all the worlds and the world and all the wars. Look at the Holocaust. It was all about one individual or group of people saying that they were more important than the other, and that's just really important there. So I think the role you can play in deconstructing gender stereotypes could be massive.
Yeah,
and it's at that age. At that age. Where the brain, I think it's between 0 and 6, everything gets laid down. That really important age group of kids that you'll see coming in. And so that's one thing we would really like to put on the table tonight.
So I'm going to go to the next slide and try to see how we can address these drivers. And I really want to go to Belinda and Debbie's points that they're making in the chat line. Here's the good news. The good news is you can stop it, right? But it takes a systemic approach. It takes a systemic approach to actions that prevent violence. And we've all got to work together. So you challenge, and we're going to talk about how you can do that in a way that doesn't offend and is suitable to you. That's the important thing. We promote women's independence. So if the girl takes the truck, good, yeah, you have a good old play with that. If the boy picks up the doll, what's their name? It doesn't condone or reinforce the stereotypes. And that's the third thing we want to do, is challenge them. And finally, we want to strengthen positive and equal respect for relationships. So one of the stories I tell in my lived experience, and my daughter, who's just finished school and is wandering around, she's going to look at me and go, "What are you doing, Mum?" at the moment. But she had friends at primary school who were boys, and she got paid out for it. She was made to feel a bit funny about having a boy because she had a boyfriend. Right? When we start to set up these relationships, or that they're good relationships and bad relationships from that gender point of view, that's when we start to not address the drivers. So the goal is to promote and normalise equality. And you can do that yourself. Paul, did you want to make a comment on that before we move on to the practical action
No,
rather
Kit,
than the theory?
That's really good. Really good. Thanks, Kit.
So, what can you do? The actual secret is that you've got 2 superpowers. Everyone's got these superpowers. They just don't realise that they do. The first superpower that they've got, it is if they see something, to say something. They can be an active bystander, right? And there's a really simple way that you can do that in a way that's congruent and doesn't put you in harm's way. The second thing you can do is if someone does make a disclosure to you, you can refer. So these are your 2 superpowers, and this is what you can do to prevent violence in the community. And we've all got to do it together, and we've all got to do it consistently. And that does take Herculean strength sometimes, she says, using a stereotype of a Greek god. She will correct herself.
Strength is good.
Strength is good.
Strength.
So,
I just want to say,
yep.
One thing we're trying to do with the Jesuit Social Services is not throw everything out. You can imagine some men get really defensive, that you're going to take away my masculinity, that you're going to... So we are talking healthier forms of masculinities, and we're making it plural. You can be, if I have 70 men in a room, there's 70 types of masculinities, and that's awesome, as long as they're safe and healthy. And when we think of words that we've used to describe men as tough and strong, rather than throw them out, we say, well, let's repurpose them and let's take the gender out of them. So strength required to be an active bystander. I think that, and courage, that's courage.
Yep. Courage
to tell your friend that you don't like the way he just spoke about his partner or the women across the room. That's courage.
Yep.
So we're really trying to say, don't throw that out. Let's repurpose it.
Yep. Let's go and talk first about how you manage a disclosure, though. There will be times in our lives where friends, families, people in our community we don't know will make a disclosure about a situation that they're in. And sometimes those disclosures can relate to violence that they've experienced, or controlling behaviour that they've experienced, or things that they're worried about. And we might have this already but not realise it's a disclosure. There is a really clear way that everyone can take a role in receiving a disclosure and handling it in a way that is appropriate to yourself. Because remember, you're not a counsellor, you're not a family violence caseworker, you're a worker in the toy library, in the community, but we have a role to know where there is help. So I want to take you through this. This is how we release our superpower for this. This is another framework or another simple dot points from our watch. And again, I'll send this resource through to Debbie so you've got it, right? And this is what happens. If someone comes to you and they disclose, they might say, I'm having a hard time at home. It might be a young person saying that they're seeing dad behaving inappropriately or their sibling behaving appropriately. This is what you do. Number one, you believe them. You don't excuse it, you believe them. And you show empathy. So typically what you'd say at that point is, thank you. I'm sorry to hear that happens to you. You avoid judgment or blame. The evidence tells us that if we receive a disclosure and we turn and then blame the perpetrator, or your brother shouldn't have done that, what will happen is the victim will side with their family and they will not disclose again. And the goal of this process is to let them know that help is available if they want it. They might not take it, but the wonderful thing is that they've disclosed. So you condemn the use of violence, but not the perpetrator. I'm sorry to hear that that happened. That must have been awful for you. You be open and honest, including about your skill. Look, I'm not a counsellor and I'm not the police, but I can tell you or provide you some advice on what numbers to call. Remember, if they are in immediate danger, the offer is, should we call the police if they are in immediate danger? That's the next part. The other part is to provide options. If you're in a council situation where you've got access to library resources, or if you know of referral points in the community, then you might want to refer to them. And you always empower the victim to make the decision themselves. What do you want to do? They might say nothing. That's okay. You can't make them do it, but if you keep making sure that you're available for the disclosure, you're not shutting it off, you're not pushing them back, you're being available, that is fantastic. And if they say, yeah, I think I want to do something, you provide accurate information. So they disclose, you believe them, you show empathy, you don't judge, you don't blame the perpetrator. You're honest about what you can do and what you can't do, that you want to help. You check for immediate risk. You provide options. You let them make the decision. If they say yes, you make referral. Now, at the start of this session, I gave an indication of where you could go, and I'm going to go back to them in just a moment. 1-800-RESPECT is the go-to number you can keep in your head. But sometimes you will be exposed to a disclosure from a perpetrator who might raise concerns about their behaviour. Now, at the moment, under COVID, we know, don't we, Paul, that the phone lines to men's referral and support services have increased. That's right, isn't it, Paul? It's gone up. Yeah.
It has. And we also know that significant rate in family violence, but of that, about 50% are new perpetrators, so they haven't done this before. So I think that if anyone came to me to share this, I think it's another hugely courageous thing to do, because there's so much shame involved in this area. That's why it's always been swept under the carpet. And so I know Kit will go through this as well, but again, it's to say thank you for sharing that with me. What can we do? How are you? Are you okay? I sincerely believe that someone who's being violent is not well. I don't think they're in a good place if they're resorting to violence. So to ask them, are you okay, is probably a nice lead-in to show empathy. And the fact that they've come to you to share it with you is really important. They've decided to do that. Yeah.
And the way that you respond to a disclosure from a perpetrator is kind of the same as a victim. You believe the person, but don't minimise or justify it. So someone's come to you and say, I'm very worried. I hurt my partner last night. Okay. Don't say, the thing to do is to not minimise it. So someone's natural reaction might be in the past, so I'm thinking of my grandmother's generation, is, oh, well, you probably were just a bit stressed. Don't minimise it. Just accept it. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you for telling me that. Show empathy, but do not minimise it. And often that can be done just by sitting with the disclosure and thanking them. The next thing is to condemn the use of violence, but not the perpetrator. So in that approach would involve lines like, I'm really sorry that happened, and to actually talk about the fact that that wasn't do they think that was an acceptable form of behaviour? Paul, your experience, they'll probably say, no, it wasn't. Yeah, or they'll probably query it.
And what we do know is that men's change behaviour programs, those sorts of things, that they work. People have the capacity to change. And when you listen, that's not the area I work in, but when I listen to those people talk, the man or the perpetrator won't change until they acknowledge there's a problem. So if someone's coming to you to say this, they've already acknowledged there's a problem.
Yep.
So there's a really good opportunity for us here at this stage that this person can change.
Yep.
And I like what Kit's saying. The emphasis is on that's a really poor choice in behaviour, but there's obviously a lot more to you than that behaviour.
Yep. Again, you're open and honest about your skills. Look, I'm not a counsellor. I can't help you change this, or I can't help change, but I can offer you the opportunity or support. I know where there's support available, and then provide accurate referral information. So believe, don't minimise or justify, show empathy, condemn the use of violence. That behaviour is not really you, is it? That's not really right. Not the perpetrator. You're to blame for this. It's a bit like that lesson we have when we taught to raise children. You blame the behaviour, not the child. And be open and honest about your own skills and provide a referral. So the summary of this is you should always be supportive, non-judgmental, and provide accurate referral information. And you don't have to provide advice or fix it, right? You're not a police person. You're not a family violence caseworker. You're not a men's referral or change agent. You don't have to provide counselling. And the other thing to remember is that you should not try to find out more details. If the disclosure, once that happens, there's a whole set of risks for yourself and the individual. And don't force the person to do or tell anything. And that includes if they want to take action. That's up to them. And the reason the evidence says do that is because we know if anything's forced, they'll withdraw. Paul, do you have any comments on that before I just go to what those referral points are? So this is who you've got to, this is the three nationwide. This is the 3 points of contact. If they're in immediate danger, police. Don't even pass go. Go straight to the police, right? Are you safe? Are you not safe? And then if they want counselling, the best is 1-800-RESPECT, and they have a website. And that website is an incredibly rich portal for people who are concerned about others, for organisations that want simple policies as well, but also for perpetrators and for victims, and even for yourself. If you are worried about someone in your home or your community or in your family, you can call that number. It's 24/7. It's a counselling service. The other ones for perpetrators that I cannot recommend enough is No to Violence, the Men's Referral Service, and Men's Line Australia. That is a specific counselling service for men. Is there any others that you'd add to that? I mean, I think for me, Paul, they're the 3 you can keep in your head, and they've all got online sites. So if you're in a library, you can just go to the computer and pull it up.
Yeah.
They've also got quick exit tools as well.
Debbie, did I hear a bell then? Is that us?
No, that's my clock. I have a grandfather clock.
I just wondered if Debbie was telling us to hurry up.
No. It's actually my grandfather clock. So that's that one, and I'll just keep going. The other superpower that we all have is being an active bystander. So who's heard of that term before? Yeah, it's a few people. Bystander's been around for quite a while. It actually came out of World War II. But these days, the evidence is around, well, how can we encourage communities and individuals to stand up and say something? Now, in 1968, these 2 people came together and they looked at all the instances of when people stood up and said something and what they did and what they needed to do. And often people think bystander, you just got to say something and be witty and be assertive and come back like that. No, doesn't need to be like that. The first thing a bystander does, number 1, is they notice something. And I know that seems obvious, but if your awareness is not raised that there's a problem, you won't even stand up for it. So the first thing a bystander does is they notice something. The second thing is they work out, does that need action? Those two things often happen very quickly. And then they determine, actually, I've got to do something. And they might say that because no one else is taking action around them, or they're the only one, or they work out, actually, I can do that. So there's a whole range of reasons why people might do that. And you're probably going through situations in your mind now about where that's occurred. The fourth thing they do after they've noticed it, they've decided if it needs attention, then they've assumed a responsibility. The fourth thing they do is they go, as they work out, well, hang on, what form of assistance do I want to do? And there's many different ways. And then they have the skill and the capability to do that. So those are the conditions to what bystanders do, right? Those are the components of the superpower. So if you don't notice it to start with, you're not even there. If you feel fearful, you won't even act. And there's lots of enablers to get people to act, but there's also inhibitors and barriers. Like if you're threatened, or if you don't feel backed by others, or you've got peer pressure, there's a whole range of things. But here's the thing, bystanders actually have options. Now, usually what people think is the one at the bottom. I will be direct. I will call it out. I'll say, oi, that's not right. But the other thing you can do is delay. You can go to the victim after and offer support. You can do that. You can go and say, hey, I saw that. That was not right. Are you okay? You can distract the individual. You can call them over to do something else. You can defer their attention. The other thing you can do, and this often happens in workplaces, you can delegate it. So you can refer it to a manager. Say, I saw some behaviour that was not acceptable. And in extreme circumstances, who do we delegate it to? We call the police. So bystanders actually have lots of options. In Victoria recently, you might have seen this on the national news, there was a tram with a whole lot of kids, like kids, from a private college called St Kevin's. Has anyone heard that? And they were singing appallingly. Ropeable songs. Paul knows about it well. What I know for a fact, because I met people that were on that tram, is people did try to say something, but they were shouted down and they did not feel safe. But in the end, their behaviour was called out. How was it called out? Someone shot it with a mobile phone and gave it to the ABC. So bystanders do have options. And the point that you need to know is taking action is better than doing nothing. And that's the hard thing. Now, Paul, do you want to go through some of these examples of what you can do and what you should notice?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. All our bystander work, I'll be really honest with you, for 10 years teaching bystander work, and we have a word, we call it becoming an upstander, because the word itself, by, means to stand by. So we talk about becoming an upstander, and it's some of the hardest things to do, particularly if it's your peer. If you have to call out a peer, is very difficult. But the number one thing we say, whether we're teaching primary school kids or adults, is your personal safety comes first. So I just really, I know Kit mentioned at the start, I just want to underpin that if it's not safe for you to do anything there and then, don't do it. We don't want two victims. And I find most people prefer to do something the next day. And the next day it's still very powerful. So you don't have to think, oh, I didn't do anything. It's too late now. A conversation the next day is really important.
And that would be delay, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and that's the delay, correct.
Perfectly appropriate.
What I want to mention now is what we call red flags around family violence. And I'll share a story with you. My daughter won't mind that I'm sharing this. She's much older now, but it's only because her dad is one of the rare guys who works in this space, and it shouldn't be this way, but she knew all about the red flags because this is my work. And so she knew that people trying to control you and manipulate you or possess you were early signs of a dangerous relationship. So it's just interesting how early this starts and the roles that we can play in young people's lives. She'd been going out with the boy for 12 months, and after that, another boy, she broke up with him, and another boy asked her out. And as you do at 16, she said, look, I'm not looking for a long-term relationship right now, which is really funny. And she said, yes, I'll go to the formal with you, but, you know, it's not something romantic. And she made that clear. The next day, some of her friends came up to her, been on the train with him, and he went up to her boyfriends and said, you need to stay away from her. She's mine. And they came up and told her that. And she's a pretty switched on kid, and she found a reason. I think she suggested that one of her other friends had no partner to take to the formal, and she couldn't go with him anymore. So she had knowledge that a lot of people don't have, that was one of the early signs of a bad relationship. And I think we all need, our whole community needs to know this. And I heard Kit saying this before. This is a community issue and the solutions are community based. So then the other part, as you have a look at these red flags, we often tell women about these, which is really important because they need to know about them. But it's almost, I think, a bit of towards the end of victim blaming, that women have to look out for these guys without us telling the men about them. And I think it's important for our young men, or all men, to realise that if you're putting your partner down and you start telling her that she can't see her family and her friends, they're all the first steps that consistently lead up to really worse forms of violence all the way through. And it's, if you read any vignettes from women who have talked about their relationships and how it happened, they all follow this pattern. It's fascinating that there's this pattern. And I think in your roles, you might see some of this. You might see the way that the partner speaks to the other person. That's an early red flag. And you might know someone close to you and they're in your relationship and you're not sure whether you should say anything, but you don't like the way that they're controlling your friend. But you think, oh, look, I don't think it's necessarily, no, that is actually a red flag. So generally speaking, it generally transitions from the early honeymoon period through to what I'd call possessiveness and underpinning of jealousy. And so the guys will start wanting to know where you are all the time. Sometimes that can be perceived as, oh, doesn't he love me? He always wants to know where I am. And then gradually it becomes more and more controlling until eventually, if that person resists that control, well, then they start scaling it up and it becomes physical. And once you're at that point, the trajectory is really poor. And there's signs like the way that also that if someone's cruel to animals, cruel to children, these are all signs of potential of a partner who is likely to be violent. And unfortunately, our advice is if it was my daughter in that relationship and she didn't know, and then she told me this, I would say to her, get out of the relationship. And the reason being, the research will say, as I mentioned earlier, unless that person wants to change and they know that there's a problem, they won't change. And we hear from lots of women who in their vignettes say, I thought I could change him. And it doesn't work that way. So unfortunately, if the person is showing no signs of them wanting to change at all, it's best to advise that person early on, this is not a healthy relationship. The reason I want to share this with men, I think there are some men who have no idea that where they're about to head. And if they knew, they might pause and go, oh my God, I didn't realize where this was going. And so I see this as a really important piece for us as a community to know, and that you just might see this happening, even, as I say, even in relationships, teenage relationships. In my line of work, like I was really happy that my daughter did what she did, but I was just as keen. I would love to have met that young boy and worked with him and put him on, or giving him the knowledge and skills that that's not how to do a relationship. And I think that's our role in the community about being a man myself, going to an all-boys school. I was never told how to do a relationship. And our schools are getting better at it. But I think if you have people in your lives, young men and women, this is something you can do as a community member to help prevent this.
Yeah. So thanks, Paul. And I think looking in the community for those red flags are indications to you that this is the trajectory towards violence. But remember, what we're doing is we're addressing those gendered drivers, the condoning of violence, the aggressive peer relations, and the stereotypes. So while there's red flags, there's things you can do. And we've talked about it in the bystander action, but you can be an upstander by showing you're not acceptance. You're not going to condone this. Don't laugh. Laughing often says that the behaviour is okay, and it's not okay. Don't condone the behaviour. You can change the subject. Support, offer support, the delay technique. Are you okay? But equally appropriate if the person who's doing the poor behaviour, ask them, are they okay? It's not like them. Question the behaviour. Sorry, what was that? You can also remove the victim from the situation and provide support to the victim another time. These are just examples of what you can do. And speak out. No, that's not on. Not here. Question it. How does that work? And maybe also in a delayed tactic, provide the feedback to the perpetrator another way. Pull them aside. Want to have a talk to you about what happened yesterday? What was going on there? I don't feel that was right. Sometimes people don't know in the first place that the behaviour is inappropriate. So if we just get back to that 5 steps, remember you've got options. Are you safe? Can you do it now? I always think of the best thing to say the day after. I don't know about you, but I always think the best thing to say the day after. So you've got delay. You can delegate it and distract. So we've got some great examples here of people with, seeing the boys being told off for picking up the girls' toys or whatever. There are so many things you can do. For some of the work that WHISE is a part of now, in childcare centres, the childcare workers are actually doing work to change the stereotypes in the centre for the children. They are reviewing the books the kids look at. They are looking at the toys. They are mixing them up more. So there is lots of things that you in the community can do to address those stereotypes, but you've also got these 2 superpowers to appropriately refer when you get a disclosure, and to also stand up and say something by being an upstander, noticing what's going on, working through the process, taking action, either through those 4 ways. If there's anything that we can leave you with tonight, though, it's this. Doing nothing actually does harm. The best thing you can do is something, and you've got options for doing that. This is an image taken from a campaign in Victoria that's all online from an organisation called Respect Victoria, who run ads in the community about appropriate behaviours. And I'll share some of them through Debbie because it's often really good to see it in action. But I think, Paul, in closing, we wanted to give you the opportunity to formally ask any questions that you might have. I'm conscious of time. But if there's anything, Paul, you wanted to say in closing?
No, I would love to. I know we've gone time, so if anyone wants to have a question, I'd rather let them have some time to ask questions.
Yeah. Is there any questions? Don't think so. I think people just need to be let go for the day. Is there an obligation to report? Really good. It depends upon the requirements in your state, so I'll speak for Victoria. If you are declared, as some librarians are, to be in a role where you've got a mandated authority to report, you comply with those rules. So that's usually around child protection, etc. So if you're in that situation, often if you're a teacher. I guess the other thing is if you see something in the street where you see some violence perpetrated, you could walk away. You're not going to go to jail, I guess, if you see something up the block and walk away. The question is, do you have to report it? Can you call it in? I think if you know something's going on in your own family and you observe it, that's a really hard moral choice for yourself as well. And my recommendation to you would be to call 1-800-RESPECT and talk it through with them, because they'll provide you with the advice. Paul, do you have any views there?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I just saw another question come up.
Oh,
Quickly.
Paul, you can have that one.
No, it's really interesting. Until I think you were saying it before, Kit, with bystander, until you notice that there's a problem, then you can't change it. And it's really hard when you see a family member who's cannot see the forest for the trees. There's something wrong about their behaviour. I think that sometimes coming from an empathetic point of view and asking how they are, because I'll go back to my other belief. I don't think that you're hurting people and happy or well yourself. There's usually underpinning emotional issues that are driving the tendency towards whatever the form of violence it is.
Yep.
And so what I could tell that question might be about, if you looked at the Jesuit Social Services, if you go to our website, the Men's Project, there's a whole lot of information there about healthier masculinities. So I know one thing for sure from working with men for years: if you wave the finger, they'll go defensive. They'll just shut down. So what we're trying to do is move them towards a healthier form of masculinity, which is good for them, and then good for the other. Anyone who's your atypical, stereotypical male, is twice as likely to have suicidal thoughts in the last 2 weeks, is more likely to be in a car accident, is 20 times more likely to sexually harass somebody, a woman that they don't know. And these elements are actually about their well-being as well as the well-being of those people around them. And sometimes I think that might be an angle in for some of these people who just can't see that there's a problem. So I think our website will give you a few resources that might be support to have those conversations in a little bit of a different way rather than you shouldn't.
I think the other thing too is I'd say that it's a really hard situation to be in when you know firsthand you've got a friend that's displaying behaviours that are inappropriate and they themselves can't see it. I think the thing to do is to do what Paul says, look into what can be done. The men's line that I talked to you about before has got specific resources and support mechanisms to look at and reflect at. And the other thing I'd say is you have the opportunity that if you do see the behaviour, you can take some options at that point of time. But I don't want us to be, I guess, under any illusion that something once said will fix it forever. Your life's not quite like that. So it will be persistent hard work, and it will not only take yourself, it will take others around to support you in what you're doing. But good on you for noticing. Good on you for noticing.
Jane, I can see your call. Thank you. So the gendered toy choices, fascinating. I'll try and go backwards. You saw one of the drivers was having stereotypical gendered backgrounds, and what that means is that we generally build a rigid masculinity that means I have to be tough, strong, show no emotions, etc. Now you go back to the toys and you think about Superman, and you'll see that right from the start we're starting to tell our young boys and girls what they have to do to fit in with that form of masculinity that let's be honest, our community has constructed. We've constructed it. You weren't born to go this way. We constructed it. And I kind of like working backwards to kind of explain it. If there was a man who was violent, someone mentioned this person they know right now, if you deconstruct that person over their life journey, you'll find there were many points in their life where someone could have made a comment, they could have done something that challenged the behaviour. And going right back to where you operate, it's about challenging what we're setting up. by ascribing a gender to a toy. And if anyone ever, I find questioning is the greatest way to go to challenge people. So when you, I start with colours, pink and blue. Ask people why. My mother would get really offended if I bought my sister's newborn girl a blue jumpsuit. Actually, it'd be even worse, wouldn't it, if I bought the boy a pink one? And you pull it apart, there's no gender and colours. It's completely constructed. And the same thing with toys. We've done the same thing, and we think that this is what men should be. When we have those shoulds, that becomes a rigidness. And then what that means is that by the time those men get into relationships, they're very structured about how things should be. They've learned to control. Usually control is to do with their own fears and lack of emotional regulation. And these are all the parts, as Kit was saying, that are the complex web that make up violence. And the earlier we can deconstruct these, the better.
Yeah. I think the other thing too to realise is what you're trying to address is systemic, and it's been going on since before you were born, and there's many parts to it. And one thing you've actually got in your opportunity is you belong to an association. And that network of people and that structure can be a force for good as well. And there are people in your community who want to work with you. Debbie, I'm very conscious of time, but one of your colleagues has actually asked a really important question about how to address gender and prevent violence in diverse communities. This is also work that requires you to address norms and behaviours within a community that often come from different perspectives from certainly what we may know. At the moment, WHISE is working in 3 faith groups that are different to my own and different language communities. And the work requires thoughtful conversation, and it requires rapport to be developed with the community. It requires bicultural understanding, and when I say translation, not only about language, but about cultural translation. And it requires time. So working in backgrounds where the male is considered superior to women, introducing the topic takes time. And health promotion and primary prevention, that's what we do, and it can take years, particularly if you're working from countries where the people have fled from crisis. So one of the communities we work in, Dandenong, is the Afghan community. Many of the people we work with have fled the bombing, the war. You've got to work with the community and create coalitions and community champions and actually build capacity within the community and with others. So it's complex work. It sounds like complex work. I'm very conscious of time. This is like a 2-minute overview of it, but it can be done, and it just takes time. And I would just go back to what Paul said about questioning, and always seek to question with genuine curiosity to understand as well. So I know that's a very quick question, but as well. The other one says, our construction section always sees parents pushing boys towards it. I've made the construction labels pink. That's brilliant. And there is a request to share photos of that. So I think, Debbie, that's a bit of an action. But I'm very conscious of time. Might Paul, if you're okay, if there's nothing else, say a very warm thank you. And I think we hope that this has been of value, but we will send a follow-up email to Debbie with all the resources. And if you've got any questions, Debbie, happy to come back through to either Paul or myself for follow-up.
Oh, wonderful. And we'll put all of that on our Facebook group so everybody can access those resources. But thank you so much, Kit and Paul. You've managed to make a topic that can seem overwhelming somewhat achievable, and there's a clear first step you can take. Lots of toy library people for a long time have really believed in degendering toys, but it's great to hear that there's actually a good reason around this, and that we aren't on some strange crusade. For
Not at all. Not at all. You're in it together. We're in it together.
And also, I think the message that you don't need to be a hero and take some big step, you know, providing referrals and finding the way that's right for you is
absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Everybody can do something.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for your time.
No, thank you.
And we're getting lots of thanks in the comments there. We really appreciate it, and I know it's definitely something that everybody will find opportunity. Unfortunately, most people will find opportunities.
Yeah, but we'll send out those resources, and I think when you go into little, there'll be more. They will empower your opportunity. This is my dog Sally.
Hi, Sally.
So I apologise for that. Yeah, but you will find it, and it is about going from your strengths, not about what you can't do, but what you can do. I think that's the way to end it, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, brilliant.
Great message. Well, it's been lovely to see so many friendly faces here today. If any of you aren't on the TLA Facebook group, make sure you join there, because there's lots of good sharing there. And once again, congratulations to everybody who won the awards today, and thank you once again for Paul and Kit. So maybe if everybody can turn off your, or do a visual round of applause. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Bye.